I'm Nathan Rutherford, and welcome to Myth Madness. This episode covers the great hero twins Castor and Polydeukes, who is known by the Romans as Pollux. As a pair, they were known as the Dioskouroi, which means Sons of Zeus. Considered by the ancient Greeks to be two of the greatest heroes, there are surprisingly not a whole lot of stories starring them that survive to today. But there are a few important incidents. Beyond the Dioskouroi, Greek mythology features several examples of hero twins, and I'll discuss at the end of this episode why that might be. Like many Greek heroes, the Dioskouroi twins were descended from the Gorgon slayer Perseus. After Perseus's famous adventures were over, he had several children of his own. One of his daughters was named Gorgophone. Perseus arranged for Gorgophone to marry a man named Perieres, king of Messene, a land to the southwest of Perseus's own kingdom. They started a family, but some years later, Perieres died. Since Gorgophone was still a young although widowed woman, her father Perseus arranged for her to be married to a second king, this time Obolus, the king of Sparta. In total, Gorgophone had 4 important sons: Apharius, Leucippus, Icarius, and Tyndareus. Sometimes all 4 sons come from Gorgophone's first marriage. Sometimes the third and fourth, Icarius and Tyndareus, come from her second marriage. At the same time, Gorgophone's second husband Obolus also had a son named Hippocoon, who often has a different mother. As you can tell, it is one big, complicated, blended family. And since this is usually the way it works in Greek mythology, a big, complicated family comes with big, complicated problems. According to Apollodorus, Tyndareus eventually became king of Sparta, taking over from Obolus after he died. But it wasn't going to last. Hippocoon believed he had a better claim to the throne, and he managed to have Tyndareus exiled and run out of Sparta. Unfortunately for Hippocoon, his reign did not last long either. He ran into his own problem, a not-so-little problem in the shape of a lion skin-wearing Heracles. After finishing his famous 12 labors, Heracles murdered the prince of a city called Ocalia. To be cleansed of the crime, he needed a king to purify him. He asked the king of Sparta to help him out. Hippocoon refused and offended Heracles in the process. Heracles killed the king, all of his sons, and then called Tyndareus out of exile to reclaim the throne of Sparta. At some point, either before his exile, during, or afterwards, Tyndareus married a princess named Leda. She was the daughter of a king named Thestius. I've actually already mentioned Thestius before. He had another daughter named Althea, who was the mother of the hero Meleager. After the hunt for the Caledonian boar was over, Meleager killed his uncles, the sons of Thestius. So you can already tell the marriage of Tyndareus and Leda is creating a nice web of connections between various Greek heroes, one that already includes Perseus, Heracles, Meleager, and Atalanta. And there will be more. If you've heard of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, in some ways Greek myth can be 6 degrees of Tyndareus. Leda and Tyndareus were married, but like many beautiful princesses, Leda got the attention of Zeus. There are several versions of her seduction by Zeus, but in general terms, the king of the gods visited Leda in the form of a magnificent white swan. Art on Greek vases from the 300s BC show Leda embracing the swan and kissing it. She must have slept with this Zeus swan, as later writers say she even laid an egg afterwards. Naturally, the extremely virile king of the gods got Leda pregnant, but Leda also slept with her husband Tyndareus on the same night, and became pregnant with his children too. Time passed and Leda gave birth to 4 different children, although not every source lists all 4 together. The 4 children were 2 sons, named Castor and Polydeukes, and 2 daughters, named Helen and Clytemnestra. And yes, that is the Helen, the famous woman who was later kidnapped and taken to Troy. Because Zeus and Tyndareus both slept with Leda on the same night, there was a lot of uncertainty about who is whose child. The different versions can't be sure either. Castor and Polydeukes, like some other Greek heroes I've talked about, have the whole 2 fathers thing going on, but the twins together are widely referred to as a pair called the Dioskouroi, which roughly means Sons of Zeus. but at the same time they're often referred to as the Tyndaridai, which means sons of Tyndareus. In this way, they are like the more famous Heracles, who also had two fathers, Zeus and the human Amphitryon. But out of Heracles and his brother Iphicles, Heracles was undoubtedly still the biological son of Zeus. So who was the biological father of Castor and Polydeukes? In the 700s BC, 2 Homeric hymns describe them both as sons of Zeus, as does Hesiod's Catalogue of Women and Homer's Iliad. However, Homer's Odyssey suggests their father is Tyndareus, but that they have the special favor of Zeus. The poet Pindar, in the 400s BC, claimed Polydeukes was the son of Zeus, while Castor was his mortal brother and a son of Tyndareus. Centuries later, Apollodorus's library agrees with this, while the Roman Hyginus, at different places in his fabulae, says both boys, and only Polydeukes, were the sons of Zeus. Various other sources also come down on different sides of the debate. For the girls, it's a little more simple. Helen, like her brothers, is both considered a daughter of Zeus and a daughter of Tyndareus. Clytemnestra is always a daughter of Tyndareus only. Apollodorus's library has the 4 siblings arranged so 1 son and 1 daughter go to each father. Of course, in the greater scheme of things, it doesn't really matter all that much. Zeus wasn't involved in the raising of any of the children. Tyndareus raised all 4, and they all grew up in the royal palace of Sparta. But let's leave Tyndareus for now. Castor and Polydeukes will be our main heroes for this episode. So on to their adventures. Unlike celebrated heroes like Heracles and Perseus, Castor and Polydeukes, unfortunately, do not have a lot of surviving myths that have them as central characters. Instead, they appear in the myths focused on other heroes. The twins appear in cameos. Both divine twins were considered talented young horsemen, and were said to have received horses as gifts from the god Poseidon. Sometimes Castor is specifically referred to as a tamer of horses, and shown riding a horse, but sometimes this is done for both brothers. Polydeukes is given his own special talent at boxing. In fact, in Greek, his name even means many fists. We see this talent on display in the twins' first cameo during the voyage of the Argonauts. As I detailed back in the Jason episodes, when Jason announced he needed a crew to sail on a journey to retrieve the Golden Fleece, heroes from all over Greece crossed the country to join him. Castor and Polydeukes were 2 of those heroes, and they left Sparta to travel all the way to Iolcos. They are core members of the Argonauts, being named in every available source telling the adventure. However, like with many members of Jason's crew, the different sources for the adventure mostly keep Castor and Polydeukes in the background on the journey. But when the ship reached the land of a fierce tribe called the Bebryces, it was Polydeukes' time to shine. The king of Bebryces, a man named Amycus, had the nasty habit of challenging any travelers that arrived to a deadly boxing match. Amycus rudely challenged the Argonauts to send their best boxer to fight him, or else they would not be permitted to leave. The heroes were angered by Amycus's arrogance, and Polydeukes most of all. He accepted the king's challenge. The duel was fairly equal. Amycus needed to be talented, since he'd already killed many men before. Polydeukes and Amycus rained blows onto each other. Jaws cracked, teeth clattered. Eventually, though, Polydeukes dodged the king and struck him behind the ear and broke his skull. The king died. His angry followers attacked the heroes, but Polydeukes and Castor and the rest of the crew escaped to continue on their journey. On the return voyage, the Argonauts faced the wrath of the gods, after Jason and Medea killed her pursuing brother. It ultimately fell to Castor and Polydeukes to pray for the gods' forgiveness, likely because they had the favor of Zeus more than any of the other heroes. That is, of course, what Castor and Polydeukes did in Apollonius of Rhodes' Argonautica, the best surviving source for the Argonaut adventure. There are hints, though, that they may have played a larger role in other, now-lost versions of the story. Diodorus of Sicily, writing in the 1st century BC, presumably had access to some of this other, now-lost material. He described the twins as the most courageous of all the Argonauts, and said that out of all the heroes on the adventure, they gained the most distinction. After the quest for the Golden Fleece ended, the crew dispersed, and Castor and Polydeukes presumably returned to Sparta. But not for long. Soon, another call for heroes went up, but this time it didn't come from Jason in Iolcos, but instead from the hero Meleager in Calydon. Meleager had also been one of the Argonauts, so it is only fitting that many of his Argonaut friends would come running. Meleager's request was for the heroes to hunt a monstrous boar the goddess Artemis had sent to rampage through Calydon's countryside. Once again, Castor and Polydeukes left Sparta to join the adventure. Like with the Golden Fleece adventure, they were part of a core group of boar hunters. They're named in all 4 of the main late-period sources we have for the Caledonian boar hunt story. However, the twins play even less of a role in the hunt than they did in the Argonaut voyage. They joined the pack of hunters, but there is no mention of anything they did during the hunt. It's possible the twins were never originally considered hunters for the boar. The later sources may have all padded their lists of hunter names with the twins to pad the adventure with more famous heroes. So those are the twins' cameos. Their role in the next myths are more central. Last episode, I discussed the time the heroes Pirithous and Theseus decided they needed new wives. Both men's previous wives had died, and Pirithous and Theseus determined kidnapping women was the best way to get new ones. The plan was they would each help the other find a wife, and the first woman they planned to kidnap was Helen, the young daughter of Tyndareus, and the sister of the hero twins Castor and Polydeukes. And Helen really was the young daughter of Tyndareus. In fact, she was really just a little girl. One source explains that she was only 10 years old. She was apparently already the most beautiful woman in the world. Now, does that mean as a daughter of Zeus, she grew up quicker than other 100% human girls? I don't know, maybe. Many male heroes who were the sons of gods, Heracles for example, were said to have grown into strong adults quicker than other humans. So maybe that's what's supposed to be happening here. However, the typical interpretation is that Pirithous and Theseus were planning to kidnap and marry a child, which is just not something you want people to do. But the young Helen lived in Lacedaemon, the city also known as Sparta. According to Diodorus, Pirithous and Theseus marched to the city with a number of companions. This detail suggests combat of some kind when they arrived. Bridal kidnappings did happen in the ancient world, and these were usually the end result of a larger raid conducted by groups of young men. The historian Plutarch says the men found Helen dancing in the temple of Artemis, and unfortunately for Helen, she was seized and carried back to Athens. Once in Athens, Pirithous and Theseus came to an agreement. They would draw lots. The winner could marry Helen, but would have to aid the other man in getting a different wife. Theseus ended up winning Helen. As I focused on last episode, the 2 men then tried to kidnap the goddess Persephone for Pirithous, but ended up being trapped in the underworld. However, before they left, what did Theseus do with the young Helen? In most versions, Theseus did not marry Helen right away. Since she was so young, she wasn't of marriageable age. So instead, he sent Helen to a place called Aphidna, a town near Athens that Theseus also ruled over. There, Helen was looked after by Theseus's mother Aethra, and Theseus tasked several of his most trusted lieutenants to guard the 2 women. The idea was that Helen would be kept safe and secure, although still imprisoned, until she was old enough to marry Theseus for real. That is the main version of the story. There are some slightly different ones, though. In one, Theseus did not kidnap Helen himself. Instead, she was kidnapped by 2 twin warriors named Idas and Lynceus, who brought Helen to Theseus. In another take, Helen is slightly older, or at least old enough to have a daughter with Theseus. And then we have a story where Helen was not kidnapped at all. In this version, Helen's father Tyndareus found out his nephew wanted to kidnap her, and so sent her away to stay with Theseus and be looked after. Besides that one account, though, Helen is almost always taken against her will, and then left in the care of Theseus's mother. But what did her family do about it? I can't really imagine that the warlike Spartans would have just let their princess go. Didn't Tyndareus try to get his daughter back? And where have her 2 warrior brothers Castor and Polydeukes been all this time? I think we can assume that they were not in Sparta when the Athenians came and took Helen. It's not clear where they were, though. Maybe they were hunting the Caledonian boar, maybe they were with Jason and the Argonauts, maybe they were on some adventure that hasn't survived in the literature. Eventually, though, they came back to find Helen gone. Castor and Polydeukes decided to get her back. Their job was easier than they thought, since Theseus had already gone to the underworld with Pirithous and disappeared. According to Plutarch, Castor and Polydeukes took an army of Spartans and laid siege to Aphidna. They won a battle, stormed the city, and rescued their sister, who was unharmed. Castor and Polydeukes also captured Theseus's mother Aethra, and decided to take her captive to act as a servant to Helen. From then on, Aethra would remain an attendant of Helen's for the rest of her life. At the beginning of the episode, I introduced Castor and Polydeukes' human father Tyndareus, and I mentioned how he was the son of a woman named Gorgophone, who was in turn the daughter of the hero Perseus. Later on in their adventuring, Castor and Polydeukes ran into some trouble with their cousins, so let's back up and talk about Tyndareus' family a little more. Besides Tyndareus, Gorgophone gave birth to 3 other sons. Their names were Apharius, Leucippus, and Icarius, and they were either full brothers or half-brothers of Tyndareus. For this story, Apharius and Leucippus are the important ones. They both lived in Messene, another ancient Greek city-state not too far from Sparta, and Apharius ruled the kingdom. Leucippus had 2 daughters named Phoebe and Hilera. Apharius had 2 important sons. These were the twins Idas and Lynceus, and like Castor and Polydeukes, they were both heroic warriors. And also like Castor and Polydeukes, they had a possible immortal parent. The Apharius twins, but in particular Idas, may have been sons of Poseidon. Idas is in fact one Greek hero who likely had a whole collection of his own myths that don't survive to us today. There is one story, hinted in Homer's Iliad, that tells how he was involved in a love triangle with a woman named Merpessa and the god Apollo. Idas and Apollo apparently fought with arrows over her. The later library of Apollodorus adds some more details, saying Zeus stopped the fight and made Merpessa choose. She chose Idas, because Apollo wouldn't age and she feared he would desert her when she got old. Both Idas and Lynceus were listed as joining Jason on the voyage for the Golden Fleece, and both are listed in some sources for the Caledonian boar hunt, too. The twins had their own special talents. Like how Polydeukes was a skilled boxer, Lynceus had excellent eyesight. His name even means lynx-eyed. You might think with all their similarities, their common adventures, and their family connection, the 2 pairs of twins might get along just fine. But unfortunately for them, they did not. It may have not been completely their fault either. According to the poet Lycophron, Zeus, for whatever reason, decided to manipulate the twins and cause them to quarrel. This quarrel gradually built up into a feud that eventually turned into violence. There are 2 different motivations for the argument, and several different Greek sources align somewhat with each. In one tradition, the 2 pairs of twins argue over cattle, and in the other tradition, they argue over women. Scholars usually treat these traditions as alternates, but there is also the possibility that they could be 2 events in the lives of both sets of twins. In the cattle tradition, according to Apollodorus, all 4 twins, Castor, Polydeukes, Idas, and Lynceus, all joined up as comrades to steal the cattle of some unsuspecting neighbor. Their raid was successful, and it came time for the 4 cousins to divide what they'd stolen. To help them decide, Idas killed one of the cows and divided its carcass into 4 equal parts. He said they would have an eating contest. Whoever finished their part first would win half the cows, and whoever finished second would get the remaining. They agreed and sat down to eat, but before anyone realized what was going on, Idas swallowed all 4 shares and drove off all of the cattle himself. Castor and Polydeukes found this turn of events to be unacceptable, so they set out and prepared an ambush for Idas. From there, we get the bloody violence. The other tradition explaining the fight involves a bridal kidnapping, and the cousins on the other side of the family. 2 marriages were arranged between Apharius' sons Idas and Lynceus and Leucippus' daughters Phoebe and Hilera. Naturally, a big celebration feast was held, and their other cousins, Castor and Polydeukes, were invited. But Castor and Polydeukes desired Phoebe and Hilera for themselves, so they kidnapped the 2 brides-to-be and escaped to Sparta. Castor ended up marrying Hilera, while Polydeukes married Phoebe. Both twins had 1 son each, with their new stolen brides. Both these traditions, involving the theft of cattle or the theft of women, roughly come together at the end with a fight involving all 4 heroes, and 3 of their deaths. Although who kills who differs slightly between the different sources. It seems the different Greek poets and writers imagine the fight scene in different ways. But generally speaking, in the cattle raid versions, Castor and Polydeukes laid a trap for Idas and planned to ambush him. In the bridal kidnapping tradition, Idas and Lynceus angrily set out to rescue their fiancés from their cousins. In Apollodorus' ambush story, the attack fails. Lynceus, with his sharp eyes, was able to spy Castor sneaking up, and warned Idas. Idas then killed Castor. Meanwhile, Polydeukes killed Lynceus. Idas and Polydeukes fought together. Idas hit Polydeukes in the head with a rock, and in revenge, Zeus zapped Idas with a lightning bolt. In other versions, though, Castor and Lynceus get in a duel first. The poet Theocritus actually gives us some detailed action. According to him, Lynceus aimed a sharp thrust at Castor's knee, but Castor stepped back, dodged the blade, and then chopped off the top of Lynceus's hand. Dropping his weapon, Lynceus ran to where Idas was hiding, before Castor drove his sword into Lynceus's back, spilled his guts onto the ground, and Lynceus then fell dead. Idas moved in to attack Castor, but at that exact moment, Zeus intervened. The god zapped Idas with a lightning bolt, just like with the other version. Here, though, we don't get any involvement from Polydeukes. So where is he? The fight follows a similar order in Hyginus's version. In this one, with his brother already dead, Polydeukes rushed to attack Idas, overcame him in a duel, and reclaimed Castor's dead body. In fragments of the lost Kypria poem, we get the oldest version of this story. In this one, this time, Castor and Polydeukes attempted to steal Idas's cattle, but were caught. Idas killed Castor, and Polydeukes kills both Idas and Lynceus. Centuries later, the poet Pindar probably used some knowledge of the Kypria for his own retelling. He also provides the earliest example of Zeus using lightning. Like in the earlier poem, the twins tried to steal cattle from Idas but are caught. Castor is mortally wounded, and Zeus punishes Idas by zapping him. Pindar also provides a very emotional ending. With Idas and Lynceus dead, Polydeukes ran back to where his brother lay on the ground and found him still barely alive. With hot tears streaming down his face, he begged Zeus to let him die too. For glory is departed from a man robbed of his friends, and under stress of toils, few mortals will abide faithful companions to share in the labor. Because Castor was only mortal, and only Polydeukes was the true son of Zeus, his father Zeus made him an offer. He said that Polydeukes was destined to dwell on Olympus, but if he wanted, Zeus would allow him to share his fate with his brother. So every other day they would live beneath the earth in the underworld, and the rest of the time they would live in the golden citadels of heaven. The Dioskouroi twins, Castor and Polydeukes, were 2 of a very select group of Greek heroes who were elevated to godhood after they died. The most well-known of this group is Heracles, who ascended to heaven and became a god after his body was burned in a funeral pyre. Castor and Polydeukes also joined the gods on Mount Olympus, although as you've just heard, there were limitations on how much they lived there. Additionally, they may not have always been considered inhabitants of Mount Olympus. Others, like Asclepius the son of Apollo and Ariadne the wife of Dionysus, were retrieved from the underworld after their deaths and brought to live with the gods. As you might expect, heroes turned into gods were also viewed as gods, and thus worshipped by the ancient Greeks. The Dioskouroi had significant cults across Greece. 2 of the surviving Homeric hymns were dedicated to them, and showcased their importance to travelers. Surprisingly, they were called on to protect ships from deadly storms. That brings us to the end of Castor and Polydeukes' adventures. A few moments ago, I compared the twins to their rivals Idas and Lynceus, and I'd like to take a little time now to make a point about Greek heroes more generally. Castor and Polydeukes were hero twins who were the sons of Zeus. Idas and Lynceus were hero twins who may have been sons of Poseidon. Both sets had an immortal father and a human father, and both sets included a brother who was probably the immortal son and another who was technically the humans. Interestingly, this arrangement has popped up already. The other major example is Heracles and his brother Iphicles. Heracles was considered the son of Zeus, while Iphicles was really only the son of Amphitryon. If you look more generally, there are other examples of hero twins like this throughout Greek myth. Heracles fought against the Molyanides. These twins were the sons of Poseidon. Uniquely, they were conjoined twins in most sources. There's also Peleus and Neleus, two more twin sons of Poseidon. In Italy, there were the founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, and also the Pollici, two more twin sons of Zeus. But another excellent example of hero twins is Amphion and Zethus, who I talked about in a past episode. They were considered founders of Thebes because they built the city's walls. They were twin sons of a woman named Antiope and Zeus. Antiope was also linked to a human man named Epopeus as far back as the 7th century BC. The Greek Pausanias, quoting from Asios of Samos, a poet from 640 to 617 BC, gives more details on the parentage of these babies, saying Antiope was impregnated by both Zeus and Epopeus. So, once again, we have here twins with two fathers, likely with Amphion being the son of Zeus, and Zethus being the son of Epopeus. Nearby, there are other mythological twins too, responsible for founding kingdoms. Aeolus and Boetus were sons of Poseidon. Trophonius and Agamedes were the sons of the king of Orchomenos. They were also considered the sons of Apollo. They were supposed to have built the Oracle of Delphi. The same patterns appear throughout Greece. What's more is the usual term for Castor and Polydeukes were the Dioskouroi, sons of Zeus, but they were also regularly called riders of white horses, or something at least related to white horses. This connection to white horses is also used to describe the Molyanides twins, Amphion and Zethus, and even Heracles in one place. What we have here are several examples of twin heroes with each having their own unique talent. These twins have two fathers, one a god and one a human, typically being a king. Additionally, these heroes are always linked back to horses, especially white horses. Could it be possible they're all borrowing from the same template? Maybe what we have here is a collection of hero twins, who all developed out of an earlier pair of mythological twins, whose stories spread throughout Greece and then gained their own distinct local flavor with their own local stories. Many scholars believe just that all these Greek hero twins grew out of a much more ancient cult of hero twins, going all the way back to the age of the Mycenaean Greeks, and possibly even earlier. That, of course, will be a topic for another day. Right now, that's all for this episode. If you're enjoying this podcast, please share it with a friend. As always, thank you for listening.